I just came from Bejala to Jericho, as I will be traveling tomorrow. And the reason I came today is due to the situation in the West Bank that continues to get more and more extreme, I would say, with all of the closures, all of the checkpoints, the settlers' violation within the West Bank. It's becoming really extreme. More than 8 people were shot, killed by settlers and the military just in the last 15 days. Today, there was demolishing of more than 22 houses around the West Bank. Some of our friends just received demolishing also orders, even though they are in A area. One of them is Jamil Qassas. He's an activist with Combatants for Peace for the past 10 years. He just received the same order for his house and more than 40 houses in his neighborhood in Al Khadr in Bethlehem. And this continues to take place in so many areas in the West Bank, also in East Jerusalem. And what we try to do in Satyam is to bring all of this awareness and to try and support as much as possible with all of the protective presence that is taking place, political awareness, sending our activists to these areas, inviting these people and activists also to have a home in Satyam. So we also host foreigners and Jewish who are in the protective presence. They get to come and have a home and have a meal and be held, specifically after they go through the harassment and the violence during their shifts of a protective presence. So Satyam is also an open space where groups and people and activists can come and gather and do their work and sit and meet again 24/7. I am there holding it, and soon we will introduce Lina Al-Qadiri to you, the other Palestinian holder. And we are working now also on our organic garden in Satyam, together with the community, which we find the land a way to really heal and a way to really connect and building together. And with Gaza, I think you are all updated on what is happening. Still, the ceasefire is not happening. Still, the bombing is going on, and the humanitarian aid is not entering Gaza. At least what is entering is the very minimum of what people actually need. And now the medical is going through even of a deeper crisis for not even having acamol. And you could imagine with all the pain and the suffering the people there are going through, what does it mean? And to us, this is why it's so important and such an honor to have Tarek Maassarani with us today. He's a peace and justice practitioner, an educator, an international recognized trainer in restorative justice and nonviolent communication. I was very lucky to meet Tariq many years ago in our first community space, ICOMI, where my learning, where my activism, where my story shifted and it changed in that community. And it is still one of the biggest reasons why I hold to this vision of community for Palestinians and Israelis. So Tariq was born into a Jewish Muslim family with roots in Haifa and Tripoli and Washington, D.C. His life and work are shaped by both personal and the professional connections to the region. For more than 2 decades, he has accompanied communities navigating conflict, trauma, and deep social polarization, helping people build pathways toward accountability, healing, and lasting peace. To me, meeting with Tariq many years ago and learning together with him nonviolent communication and dialogue, restorative justice, had really brought so much awareness to me, had really brought so much ground to me in my activism of today. That connection and that space to come together, also for him being a Muslim Jewish background, I connect even more now with my brothers being married to Jewish Israelis and having kids and being in this amazing love that it brings people together, and yet witnessing the reality and what is taking place made it very crucial to us to bring Tarek, to listen to him, to be in togetherness with him. And I want to encourage you to write your questions on the chat if you have any question throughout the Zoom. And we will also have more space for you to bring yourselves together with us, your questions after Tarek. So thank you, Rivi, Marcos, the moderator of today. And thank you, Tarek, for joining us, Habibi. Such an honor to welcome you and an honor to have you with us. And I look so much forward to hear again from you and learn again with you. So welcome, dear.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, May. It's good to be with you all. So I'm going to be moderating this part of the conversation with Tarek. And yeah, so I'll just introduce myself. I'm Rivi. I have been working with Satyam for the past few months, mainly on the international team, together with Ruvi, if you want to put your hand up. Yeah, it's been such an honor and yeah, just so much gratitude to be part of this team and part of this organization. Um, so with that, Tarek, hi.
Excuse me, Rivi. I just
Yeah.
want, and it's Marcia. I don't have a picture and I don't have a chat, so I'm just saying that, but I am here and I'm very grateful to be here. That's it. I'm muting out now.
Okay, good to be with you, Marsha. I'm sorry, maybe Nurit, if you want to text Marsha and see if you can somehow support, or Ruvi. Yeah, great. So, Tarek, we would love to learn a bit about you. At Satyam, we're all about storytelling and really learning our stories and how they shaped us throughout our lives. So, would love to hear a bit about your story, where you grew up, how did it bring you to your professional life now? Yeah.
Thank you. And before I begin to share some stories, I also want to acknowledge the incredible work, May, that you and the rest of the Satyam team have been doing on the front lines. And thank you also for everyone who's taking time out to come and join here. I don't take it for granted that you come to listen to what I am excited to share with you. There was reference to my mixed background. So my mother was born to a Sunni Muslim by technical identity, a Lebanese father, and a Jewish German mother in Tripoli, Lebanon. My grandmother had left with her family from rising Nazi Germany in the 1930s, landed in Haifa originally, was in Beirut at a time when you could go back and forth with a train through Rosh Hanikra into Beirut from Tel Aviv, and found herself with my grandfather, Tarek Maassarani. Farouk was a budding political activist. He was a communist. He likes to say he was the only Arab leader that supported the 1948 petition plan. Only later, after experiencing some time in jail, did he shift into legal practice and trying to work more inside the system, particularly around land reform in the north. His father, by the way, was the Ottoman administrator for the northern Bekaa Valley under prior during Ottoman rule. So this is what my mother grew into. She also went to Catholic nun school and ended up studying in Germany, medical school, where she met my father, and I was born in East Germany. So my life has been very shaped by large political events and currents. They've pulled our family together and apart, bringing the most unlikely of people into relationship and also pulling them back apart again. So, I wasn't able to stay in East Germany, and I ended up having to leave my father at a time when he couldn't leave East Germany, is one example. So the way the wall there operated to separate us. what I think is relevant to the theme of today's talk, which is going to talk about restorative justice and its sister domain, transitional justice, is that I very much found, despite a life of much shifting and moving and these intersections with large histories, particularly histories of division and violence and harm, I very much found that when I first discovered restorative justice, which was years later, it resonated with something deeply, something that I didn't find as someone who went and studied and then practiced law for over a span of about a decade. I didn't find it in the immediate family cultures that I grew in, whether they were talking about the Middle East or they were just talking about who needs to clean up the dishes. There was something that resonated about restorative justice deeply inside of me, and I had a similar experience with nonviolent communication as well. And that is what I'm hoping to bring to our discussion today about the Middle East, about Israel-Palestine. And it is something that I've been privileged to be able to bring to work throughout predominantly the US and most especially in the DC area, but in some ways I've been able to work beyond the US as well.
Beautiful. So we're diving deeper in. Yeah, could you share a bit about, maybe for some of us that don't know what restorative justice is, what's the difference between restorative justice and maybe the binary way of thinking about justice?
So I think what I would love first, before I answer this question, is if you could unpin both of us, and so we can see all the tiles of people. And if folks could just raise their hand, you can raise your actual hand or your virtual hand, if you've ever heard of the term restorative justice before. Okay, so I'm seeing maybe half. It's a two-part screen here, so okay. All right, thank you. Okay, so for some of you, this may already be a reminder, a refresher, or repetitive. For others of you, this may be new. Restorative justice is hard to describe. I'll start with that. But in its most narrow form, you can think of it as an alternative to the mainstream forms of justice that we are grown up with thinking is justice, right? So we hear the word justice and we think of courts, we think of lawyers, we think of prisons. That is what is known as the justice system in the West, and through colonial efforts has spread throughout the world, so that even in places that were foreign to Western forms of justice, they've ended up adopting it, and the mainstream thought of justice is this punitive process. Someone is alleged to have committed a crime. The crime is defined by people who are not part of this crime, is defined ahead of time, oftentimes by people far away and difficult to relate to. A state actor prosecutes this. It's not someone involved in it in any personal capacity. A judge who's also removed makes decisions about whether the crime was actually committed or not by this person. And if it was, there's very clean cut. Someone was guilty or someone was innocent. And if they're guilty, then there's a punishment that's put forward. If they're innocent, they're let go, right? And the punishment is often for crimes that rise to a certain level of seriousness. The punishment is often imprisonment of some form. So that is what is typically framed as justice in how many of us grow up in the world. So restorative justice can be simply seen as an alternative to this. The idea being that instead of state actors deciding, the judges and the attorneys deciding how to handle a crime, how to deal with a violation of a code or law, we bring people together and we center on the term harm or impact instead of crime. The idea that anyone, regardless of what legislation says, can have an experience of doing harm and being harmed. And that through a process of acknowledging the harm, understanding the harm, and that you can come to almost like into a relationship with someone around how to address the harm. And so it's essentially a dialogue process that oftentimes leads to the people involved, whether they were the people harmed, the people who did the harm, agreeing on what is needed to prevent harm from happening again, to repair the harm that did happen, and to move forward, to allow for healing and sometimes even reconciliation. I'll say this, restorative justice doesn't demand any of this from anyone participating. It doesn't demand that you forgive. It doesn't demand that you maintain a relationship. At its core, it just demands that you be authentic in expressing what you experienced and that you're willing to participate and listen to the others, as well as express yourself. That is really at the base what is demanded. Then the process takes its own shape. Every single case might have a very different outcome, even if it's a similar kind of harm. So that is a way I would describe restorative justice. And in the typical setting, you will have a diversion where a judge or a prosecutor might say, we're going to give you this option to do restorative justice. And if the people involved, the person harmed and the person who did the harm agree, then they would be taken off, usually by a nonprofit would handle the case and then let the court system know whether the case has been resolved to everyone's satisfaction, in which case the criminal process concludes. That is a typical diversion program. I've been involved in setting up, running, facilitating almost a dozen of these kinds of programs. But I want to say a quick thing that restorative justice is more. Let me give you an example. So let's say a young person, and I've handled many of these cases, goes into a store, steals a bag of chips, goes out, is followed by the security officer, is stopped, police is called as they're detained, police come, they arrest the young person, they take them to a processing facility, and then they're set to go before a juvenile, oftentimes judge. These kinds of shoplifting cases were classic restorative justice materials 2 decades, 3 decades ago when restorative justice first appeared in the modern criminal context. And so you can imagine in the process, a couple things could happen that would never happen in a criminal process. One is that the young person might get a chance to explain that they were hungry, right? They might get a chance to explain they didn't have money, they needed food, or that they were peer pressured, that there were other things going on. At the same time, they might also be affirmed that even though they did this and maybe they want to consider it a mistake, that they're still valuable as a human because they're going to people in the process that value them, that are in relationship with them. And the people who are harmed by this, who might be the workers at the store, also get a chance to express, like, what does shoplifting do? What is it? It might impact their own, if it's a small business, it might impact their own bottom line. And if it's a larger business, oftentimes it's millions of dollars of loss that then is carried over to the consumer, who now have to pay $1 more for a bag of chips. And those are the kinds of conversations that then allow for more, let's say, a conclusion or an outcome that addresses more of the root causes of what happened. I don't want to keep it at a shoplifting case, because one of the things that is happening in the restorative justice movement is moving into much more serious harm. So myself, I've done dozens of homicide and rape cases, and what we've found as a movement is that actually those cases, the outcomes are even more effective through restorative justice than they are through a court system. What do I mean by that? That there's less recidivism, less reoffending that happens, greater rates of satisfaction by the people involved. The higher the stakes, the higher the kind of impacts that we're talking about. So that gives you a sense of restorative justice. The assumptions and the principles underneath it are that people may be motivated by the fear of incarceration and punishment and the shame, but that there's a whole other set of impulses that drive human behavior, and that is empathy, It's the drive to be in good relationship with each other. And a restorative justice process taps into those as motivations for people to come together, to change, to want to forgive, to want to ask for forgiveness, to change, to want to agree to things that will help them move forward and repair the harm that's happened.
Mm.
If I can say one last thing about this, which is that much of these principles, these ways of navigating harm, are familiar to Indigenous folks and can be found also in spiritual and religious traditions. They can be found in some of your ancestral beliefs, religious texts, and so forth. So while we live in a society that considers it normal for harm to be responded in a punitive manner, there is a deep root in a restorative approach that can be found within each one of our own ancestries.
Yeah. Thank you for kind of spreading it out in that way. I hear you and I keep thinking about the reality that's happening in Israel, Palestine, in the West Bank, especially the past few days, in Gaza, the genocide. And I'm thinking, leading up to this conversation, also, this question has been in my mind, like, how is restorative justice? I know that it's relevant in these times, and how is it relevant right now? Like in your mind, in with all these years of experience, with the identity that you hold, how do you see it being relevant right now?
Yeah. So I think to answer that, I want to introduce another field, a kind of a sister field of transitional justice and what that promises. Um, Transitional justice, unlike restorative justice, which has grown out of very much the interpersonal harms that happen within domestic criminal jurisdictions, transitional justice grew out of the intersocial harms that happen between societies, between ethnic groups, between national groups, or within national groups. Um, as a field, it really emerged in the 1990s, which was a time when many, many major civil wars and other forms of mass harm were coming to a close. So you can think about everything from East Timor in the east, moving through Rwanda, and up through the Balkans to Northern Ireland, right? So there was an incredible amount of political upheaval that was being processed during the 1990s. And it was during these times that people were thinking, like, how do we move forward? How do we move forward when we've had mass atrocities marking the histories and the relationships of people who are living and trying to share a land? Hopefully this sounds somewhat familiar, at least strikes you as like, wow, this seems very relevant to what we face these days in the region. Now, in transitional justice, before we talk about the region more specifically, transitional justice has had a, 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 a palette of different options that have been used and tried. You can say that transitional justice in some ways has its roots in the Nuremberg trials that followed World War II. And so there's one strand of transitional justice that's about punitive accountability for the worst offenders, for the war criminals within a context. And so we have seen in the 1990s a number of courts being set up, from the International Criminal Court to the specialty courts for Sierra Leone, for the former Yugoslavia, and so forth. So that's been one strand of the transitional justice movement. On the other hand has been the strand that was really pioneered by South Africa, but used in many other contexts since, are these truth and reconciliation commissions. The idea between the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions is, instead of punishing those who have done harm, allowing a chance for those who've been harmed to be able to express that harm, and that to be heard by those who are responsible at the highest of levels, and giving a chance for those who have been responsible, to come clean and to acknowledge the harm that they've been involved with and the impacts that have had on those who've been harmed. So Truth and Justice Commissions take on a very restorative justice flavor, in the sense that it's more about there being space for understanding, there being space for compassion or empathy to arise, and there being space for ways of figuring out together how to move forward. There are many, many drawbacks to the way Truth and Justice Commissions, particularly the South African TRC, have played itself out. They've oftentimes failed to really look at the structural issues and allow for reparations for those who have been harmed. So they've provided some emotional relief to people who didn't need to suffer in silence, who were recognized for what they went through, but they didn't necessarily change the practical reality for many South Africans moving forward. There have been other
Can you just say what you mean when you say practical, like financial?
Financial, exactly.
Okay.
The economic and political marginalization that they experienced, the relic of apartheid as it's played itself out. Right. So people still found themselves with little access to resources and et cetera, in ways that mirrored what they were going through under apartheid, for example. But since then, those were some. We have to also take into consideration, these are very new mechanisms that have not been used at such scale. And since then, there have been Truth and Reconciliation Commission instruments that have been used, I think, that have managed to push and advance how much they offer the opportunity for reparations and for forward looking. Some of them not necessarily on the national scale. So some of them have happened. I'm familiar, for example, the Wabanakis in Northeast US were able to do a truth and reconciliation process for what happened to boarded indigenous school children. If you're not familiar with this phenomenon, but for hundreds of years, Euro-Americans would foster or adopt or take away, break up indigenous Native American families and try to integrate or assimilate indigenous people into the boarding system, with much harm coming out of it. And so there was a whole process of allowing people to voice what they had experienced, building an archive of that, developing recommendations, and taking that to government, which led to policy changes in the adoption and foster system within the state of Maine. There have been racial reconciliation processes in cities like Richmond, Virginia. So it's been done, it's been tried out, and I think it's pushing the envelope further and further. And I want to say one of the most powerful examples of transitional justice on the restorative side has been the fambul talk mechanisms, where in Sierra Leone, despite there being a special court that had handled the topmost decision makers during the Civil War, who were responsible for death and displacement, injury, torture, and so forth, various war crimes. It was actually a grassroots movement headed by John Cocker, a human rights activist, who was able to do dozens and dozens of these bonfire-based processes from traditions that talked about bringing people together, telling the story, and in their case, actually aiming for forgiveness and a form of collective redemption, or individual redemption and collective coming together. There's a movie about this, if you're interested, called Fambul Talk, which is the pidgin for family talk, FAMBULTOK. It's a documentary, it's quite powerful. And it shows what happens when you take sort of indigenous values, also some Christian values around redemption and forgiveness. And they were able to to impact and reconcile hundreds of villages with a fraction of the budget and a fraction of the time that it took the special tribunal to prosecute less than a dozen of the worst offenders. Rwanda comes to mind as also a mixed system, but I think that gives you a sense also of transitional justice. The idea that I want you to take home with is this. When a society, and this is true for personal and interpersonal family relationships as well, but I want you to think about it. When a society undergoes deep traumatic events, the trauma builds up from individual to families, families to larger groups. And there is a cycle that begins in which that trauma will then dictate how people act, how they perceive others, the ability to envision a shared future. That translates into policies that end up straining relationships and leading to further violence. This is well documented. It's a framework, it's a lens for seeing what has happened between Israeli and Palestinian societies over the last 80 years. The cycles of violence, oftentimes coming from deep-rooted trauma, is what I would call a public health approach to understanding why we're locked into years and decades of violence. And in order to stop those cycles of violence, right, there is no military or security approach to it. In fact, the military and security approach only exacerbates the cycles of violence, right? Within this lens, it is essential to have healing and reconciliation at the center of it. And healing and reconciliation, I spend 6 to 12 months working on a sexual harm case for 2 individuals. You can only imagine, for every year of war, there's going to need to be decades of healing and reconciliation in order to come back to a sense of individuals and groups being able to live with each other and being able to have a sense of agency in their own lives. So I want to be very clear. What we're talking about is enormous. Enormous. What is needed to escape these cycles of violence is enormous. And it's more than an add-on. It is the way that I see, the central way that I see any society moving forward. So for me, when we talk about Israel-Palestine, the questions I ask is, how are we preparing today for the decades of reconciliation and healing work that are going to be needed to disrupt these cycles? And they are cycles that are going to play out within families, within partnerships, they're going to play out within neighborhoods, and they're going to play out, on national levels. So this is where we have transitional justice tools, but we're going to need to innovate and bring these tools to a level that's much more comprehensive, sustained than they have been done before. And this is where I want to draw your attention to where there's actually a plan for how this could happen. I was part of something called the SHIFT framework. It's a post-war plan that emerged by a group of Israelis and Palestinians within months of October 7th, 2023. This group decided that in the depth of the crisis that we were seeing unfolding, perhaps we can reach new heights of vision for what the future could hold. And under the assumption that the destinies of both Israelis and Palestinians are going to be intertwined, the framework sets out to address the systemic barriers from a negotiated peace. And one of those is accountability, is healing, is transitional justice. So I will put into the chat shortly the website if you want to check out the framework, and you can go to the section that talks about transitional justice and the way a transitional process might look like for Israel-Palestine. I think I want to close this question by saying that if you're, as another reference point, if you're interested in more of the theoretical aspects of reconciliation, there's another document that that I co-authored with the U.S. Institute of Peace, called the Action Guide on Religion and Reconciliation. Um, Unfortunately, since Trump came into office, the administration has removed those guides from the website. So what I will do is have my contact information here, and if you're interested, I can share the guide with you as well, which has as I said, like a theoretical framework of how to think about reconciliation on large social scales. Yeah, I think that.
Yeah, I have so many other questions bubbling up, but I think one that's coming up right now is you shared, the bigger, from my understanding of what you said, like the bigger vision right now is to kind of think about how we prepare for this, for these systems. And I'm curious if you have, like more thoughts to share about that, um, to like ground it a bit more for us.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how do we prepare for this? Let me first be clear that while there's ongoing violence, I don't see the possibility for having a national level transitional justice or restorative justice process happening at a national level. What I do see possible here and now is starting to prepare for the national level process, and also starting to have smaller level processes. Um, so I do think it's possible to have those take place in pockets within. Um, what does that mean? I mean, I think as a first thing for everyone here, and on this call, depending on where this finds you in your life, in your work, in your proximity to different institutions, um, you know, first of all, understanding what does restorative and transitional justice mean? What does it hold out? Where does it have application to your most immediate circumstances? Some of you may have lost people within this conflict. Some of you may have experienced various harms. It might be even at the level of within your family, having ruptured family relationships because of the pressure and the polarization that we've experienced. So one of the first things is to start applying this lens and these ways of being where you can, and talking to others about it. Creating public awareness through your own networks that any future is going to need to have this healing and reconciliation aspect to it, and that restorative and transitional justice offer tools that provide precedent and evidence for how this could move forward. So learning about it, talking about it, perhaps practicing it in your own personal spheres where it makes sense when harm comes up, to try to describe it, whether you're the one who experienced the harm or others have experienced harm from you. Those are all ways. Now, if you've got advocacy that you do, if you have connections to people with more policy influence, then leverage those and start to include those in conversations. We're going to need an international community that backs this in order for it, I think, to be taken seriously. We're going to need funding that helps build up these processes. And so some of you who are not in the region may be able to advocate for those things happening and being talked about. Certainly, as a blueprint, you can check out the SHIFT framework and see what we propose there for a transitional justice process.
Thank you. Before we open it up to questions, I wanted to ask, as the international community is here, there's some people from the land I see that are also here. What are some things that you think the international community can really do to support the current situation? And what do you think they can be more in solidarity around, or around this topic and how to support it more on the land.
Yeah. I imagine I'm somewhat speaking to the choir if I say we need more we need state actors and the international community that enables, endorses, or challenges state actors in both in Israel and in Palestine to be thinking less about military security, to be thinking more long term, to be thinking about human security in a multidimensional way, and to be thinking about how the future looks after there's a permanent ceasefire. So I don't think that's anything new here. But what I do think is new is really talking about this form, this vehicle for doing this through transitional and restorative justice, and making that concept, that prospect, be socializing that into public discourse so that people become more familiar with it, and hopefully. When we come to a place where on a national level there is enough of a sense that the immediate violence is behind us, and I really dearly hope, I mean, that's not something to take for granted. I really dearly hope that the upcoming elections in Israel will produce various political shifts where certainly the pressures, well, right now, what's happening in the West Bank will be reined in, and where there's some openings to move forward on negotiations around Gaza. And I do see a possibility here. I do think we're looking at there's reason for hope. And so while many of you might be looking at the elections coming up, might be worried about which parties to go forward, part of the conversation I already want people to start is when there's a more ripe time post-elections to be thinking about the future, let's make sure that transitional and restorative justice is part of that conversation. Let's make sure politicians understand what that means in advance. Let's make sure that the advocacy groups that we're a part of understand what that means. That is part of the ask, the demands that we're going to make wherever we are, whether you're in the US and engaging in advocacy in your state or in the federal level, whether you're in Europe or whether you're inside Israel, Palestine, or anywhere else, right? You've got the targets for your particular advocacy, making sure that you're starting to incorporate these notions of transitional and restorative justice into the what's next conversation.
Thank you. I think this is a great moment to open it up. So you could put up your hand if you want to ask a question, or you can just unmute yourself. Yeah, we'll have a few minutes. Questions or reflections, anything? Yes, Magid, please.
Good night to everyone. Thank you for the discussion. I wanted to ask about this. I mean, I lived in the West Bank, and I never heard about the group or what they do on the ground. But the topic that was mentioned about restorative and transnational justice is something that we need to think about. You mentioned South Africa as an example. Even after apartheid today, South Africa, and I was in South Africa, I have a lot of friends in South Africa. This whole idea is more kind of liberal way not to do justice. It's a way to postpone justice. You know, in South Africa, you know, after apartheid, South African native indigenous people, most of them are landless. They are still poor. and nothing changed. So why should we follow a liberal framework that was, created in the late 80s and 90s to not really confront the issue? Confront the issue. In the case of settler colonialism, you have a very clear thing. In South Africa, white South African should have lost all land ownership, all of them, and be returned to black South Africans so that they have some place to sleep, some place to farm, some place, some source to live from. So if you put just a black South African president, it doesn't change anything. The same thing with Oslo. We see that in the West Bank. It's really a joke. And all the frameworks that people are using are really a joke because they don't confront the issue. It's a settler colonial project. Settlers should be dismantled from everything. And these frameworks that Tarek talked about are liberals to postpone things but don't change anything. And we have a good example in South Africa. And anyone who doesn't know, I could connect you to articles and people who are on the ground. Not one and not two, the majority, scholars, activists, everything. And also the fact that you started that with shoplifting, Tarek, is very interesting. I don't know how is that related. But I mean, my background is also in conflict resolution. And for me to decolonize even each field, I need to think in from indigenous perspective. So I used Sulha. I used Ibn Khaldun as a framework in my methodology, and I used Sulha. In Sulha, you bring a third party to two conflicting parties, third party that is neutral and has a power to impose a solution. And we don't have that in Palestine because Israel is a Western project. So there is no way in a Western dominated system for a third party to come and impose on Israel any solution, anything. The opposite. They want even always all the time more and more and more. So I think we need to think about something else.
Yeah.
Transitional justice is a joke.
Majid, I want to make sure first that I get you, so I'm going to summarize what I'm hearing, and I also want to make sure other people have a chance to talk and ask questions. So what I'm hearing is that at its base, if you don't understand the structural and historical forces that attempts like what happened in South Africa don't really solve the problem, right? They don't create justice for the larger injustice that happened historically. Did I get you?
Yes, have few people will benefit, like in the West Bank, like in the Palestine context, etc. But in general, the majority, the issue is not confronted. The core issue is people in South Africa. Majority of people lost their land, lost their life, and that's not confronted, not paid for. And here we have to do the same thing. It's not about just talking. Let's have Jews and Arabs talk to each other and all of that, And I'm from Galilee. I'm Palestinian from 48.
Yeah. So, I think this deserves, I'll just start by saying, I think what you've raised deserves hours or days of conversation. I think there's no real way to talk this through in a short way. Since we don't have that option, I want to say a few things. Some of it will be to agree and affirm what you've said. Some of it will be also to push back a little. So first of all, I completely, when you look at what happened let's take South Africa, it might be a little less charged to look at another country. When you look at South Africa, the degree in which Black South Africans suffered through the apartheid era is immense. And since the transition in 94, to a democracy, the political and economic marginalization continued, and has only improved very slowly. It certainly hasn't touched everyone. And in fact, there continue to be enormous amounts of violence that were experienced within Black South African communities. I do want to say this. Reconciliation and healing takes decades. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was architected by Desmond Tutu, primarily. Desmond Tutu is a South African. He combined indigenous traditional African beliefs with Christian beliefs, and came together with the TRC. The TRC did not implement everything, or South Africa did not implement every aspect of the TRC, including the ones that were most controversial, that talked about reparations and structural reform. And for that reason, Desmond Tutu died knowing that the work of transitional justice in South Africa was unfinished business. So, that said, it allowed for South Africa to move past apartheid. Now, I don't know where you land. I can imagine, Majid, you talking to my grandfather, Farouk. I mentioned him at the beginning of the talk. My grandfather would say, that's right. Work within the system, be pragmatic, right? Get as much as you've done, recognize it's going to be slow, and change takes place slowly. If you're going to try to demand of the system to do something that dismantles itself, good luck, right? So the other thing I want to bring up is just that white South Africans have been there for 500 years. There are white South Africans who have no sense of connection to anywhere else but South Africa. It does not excuse what happened in South Africa under apartheid, but it does complexify the notion that there are easy to identify settlers who can just go back somewhere else, and there are those colonized who can just take back the land. Unfortunately, as history rolls on, whether it's in the US or any place where colonialism, settler colonialism has left its footprint, we are facing a dilemma. And if we really value individual human lives, it's not as simple as taking a giant frame of a settler colonial history and then disrupting the current fabric of that society. So we need to be careful, in my opinion, about how we move forward with that, and how we define or classify people within that. So thank you for that. I realize a lot more hands. Thank you though for your sharing, Majid. I really value it. Thank you for bringing that up. I think I see Samir next.
Thank you, Majid. Samir, would you like to ask your question? Maybe we'll go to,
Hello.
Here, Samir. Yes, Samir.
Thank you. Tarek, my question, do you think lobbying can change anything in the ground? I think we all know that there was a plan for Smotrich in 2017. He published it called The Final Solution, خطة الحسم. And I think we are in the third level of it, that the economy and the PA is collapsing, because today there was a conference from the finance minister saying that we have, from the Israeli banks till October, they will stop dealing with us in an economic way, and that will damage fuel, that will damage medicine, that will damage almost everything that we can do. So do you think lobbying in European country, in the United States, can help bringing peace? Because as I see that we have a lot of breaking bread meetings. We have a lot of like a human right organization keep publishing things about the genocide in Gaza, about the abusing and the military occupation in the West Bank, but that is not changing anything in like on the reality. So thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you, Samir. I think what you're naming is that the situation right now is very dire. The formal power to make any significant or substantial changes in what is happening in the region lies in very few hands, and they're not hands that necessarily are very like able to be influenced easily. I do think that it's a good question to ask. I think if you're in the United States, where you have an administration that has a very interesting relationship between Trump and Kushner and Netanyahu, I think there's ways in which advocacy might be able to push in the U.S. context because of the particular relationship that those two heads of state have here. I think in the European context, I don't see much influence. But I also think we have to look at a long-term process here. So building, when you go in and you meet with a representative in your government, or you call their staff person, right? Or you join a group and you sign letters, that might not lead to any particular policy change in this moment now. But what it does is it builds momentum. It allows people to know they're reading, especially if they're in political offices, they're reading what the winds are. Where are their constituency going? What do they want? And we see in the US, there is a changing sense of what the Jewish constituency wants from relations with Israel. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not true, but it's felt, it's perceived because there are now thousands or tens of thousands of Jewish Americans in the US who are making their voices known in ways that they weren't before. Are we going to see a policy shift today? No. But is this changing a larger dynamic over the next few years, particularly over the next US elections in 2 years from now? Yes, I do believe that it is changing the landscape where things are happening. So you need to take a long-term look at advocacy and building power and shifting discourse over time. Susanna?
Thank you, Samir.
Hi, Tarek. I just want to ask something like to get things clear. Maybe I missed something. But like, does restorative justice replace, let's say, punishing the criminal? Or does it come along with punishing the criminal? Or like, does it come whenever we cannot punish the criminal? Like, which one is it? Or is it the three of them together?
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne. Thank you for the question. Look, in the criminal context, in other words, like the shoplifting context, or even I mentioned homicides and rape cases. So in those kind of context, restorative justice can be depending on where you are or which system you're in. If you come and visit me here in DC, there's a system in which after the arrest and conviction, but before there's an actual trial and sentencing, there'll be a restorative diversion option. If that person, if the people involved are satisfied with the process and come up with an agreement that addresses the harms, then the case is dropped, and there's no longer a sentence for the case. There are other cases where it only happens after sentencing. This is how it was done in Texas, actually, in the 1970s. It was once someone was already on death row, meaning they committed a capital offense where they could be either executed or they had to spend the rest of their lives in prison, that there was an option for the victims to be able to request restorative justice for their own psychological healing. It didn't change the outcome for the person who was already sentenced. And then there's, on the whole other side, there is restorative justice diversion, where you don't even get into the system. There's some where before there's any charges filed, someone might be diverted out, and they're not impacted, and they don't build a record within the system. Now, the question you might be asking yourself, well, wait a second, does restorative justice mean that folks who I consider a war criminal, would not get punished? If there were some kind of restorative aspect to a transitional justice process in, Israel-Palestine, for example. So transitional justice has basically said, we are going to keep prosecution for the highest level individuals responsible for mass atrocities, and the middle and lower levels that's where we're going to open those up for other forms of more restorative approaches. For me, I have learned something, and I don't know whether we're ripe to apply this to the transitional justice mass harm context, but I have learned something very interesting from my years and years of doing restorative justice. I've learned that the most unimaginable or worst harms that I have encountered and been asked to facilitate, when the people understood what restorative justice was asking for them, the people who experienced the harm and did the harm, and were willing to go along with a dialogue-based process, the outcomes were incredible. It does suggest to me that even for war criminals, there might be a restorative justice option. But I'm not going to decide that, and I think it needs a lot of smart and feeling people to come together around that. But I will put that out there as a possibility. Ruby?
Yes, maybe a bit in this context. My question is also maybe a very simple one. I wonder what you would say about restorative or transitional justice, about this subject, to a person who has just lost family, maybe through settler violence or ethnic cleansing or whatever, and they say, I need to fight, I need to defend, I want vengeance even. Like, is there a place for restorative justice or transitional justice there? And then where? Like in a very personal situation like this, or a very, not a state level, but yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, partly why I beg all of you to go out and to talk and discuss about restorative justice, to learn more about it, to think about it, is partly because it does require a culture change in order to be applied to something like Israel-Palestine. It requires people to understand that the revenge that they're looking for, the pain that they would like to see the other person experience, may not actually satisfy them as much as having that other person acknowledge the harm and agree to do something to address the harm. It's hard to imagine when we're not familiar with restorative systems and what it's like to be in them. It's hard to imagine wanting nothing else but revenge for the lost ones who might have been butchered or killed or displaced, right? But what we do in restorative justice is we take people even who are adamant that they want to see punishment. The person needs to pay, and we tell them, well, let's explore that. Tell me more about that. What are you really wanting underneath that desire? And sometimes having that conversation, they do come to a place where they recognize what they really want is to have someone understand the depth of their pain, and that maybe a restorative justice process is actually much better fit than trying to go to a court process where they're going to be cross-examined and their credibility is going to be tested, and you lose the human connection, the sense of understanding another's human experience within the formalities of a legal process. Evelyn?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I live in the States. I'm actually going to be starting a peace, justice, and human rights certificate program at Florida Atlantic University. And I'm not familiar, and I'm also familiar with the concept of conflict transformation, but I haven't seen transitional justice as a concept in different university programs. So I'm thinking that at least for the States, or even in Israel, even in Palestine, even around the world, what about having that whole transitional justice enter into the college conversation?
Yeah, thank you for that. Florida Atlantic played a major role in the development of restorative justice, particularly in the 90s. Some of the academics out of FAU wrote about restorative justice, and there was actually a federally funded BARGE, Balanced and Restorative Justice Program, that was very much the product of folks out of FAU. And that shifted the way juvenile justice took place in the United States for about 10 years. I want to say that restorative justice and transitional justice both are catching on in the university context. So there are degrees you can get now in restorative justice. There's a couple programs that I've taught at for some of those. There are certainly transitional justice. There's a Center for Transitional Justice that's been around for over 20 years that does amazing work on this from an academic perspective, looking at the research, the data, the case studies. So in some ways, transitional justice is more established in the academic community, whereas restorative justice has been so grassroots that it's only starting to I think, be metabolized by the academic community. I will tell you this, after October 7th, which unfortunately is also my birthday, I published a piece in the US offering a restorative response to what was happening on campuses, which in the weeks following October 7th, there were death threats and there was conflict emerging. And so I published this piece for universities, and and then over the next year, I actually worked with about a dozen different universities on addressing harms that had happened in on their campuses through a restorative lens. So mediating between encampment groups and administrations, holding dialogue processes between actually Jewish student groups with very different ideological positions, certainly between Jewish or Israel supporting groups, campus groups, and Palestinian supporting groups, or even between faculty, or working with faculty on how to have conversations in the classroom around terms such as genocide and Zionism. So it's all to say that I think in some ways, what has been happening in the Middle East has actually pushed U.S. campuses to be more thoughtful about how they handle the spillover of larger social conflict that happens on their campuses.
I feel my question was really answered, though, in terms of transitional justice programs that actually exist in the States or even in Israel, even in Palestine or whatever, actual formal programs of study. Do they exist?
If transitional justice programs exist, I encourage you to do a quick Google search and just type, Masters of Transitional Justice or Transitional Justice degrees. My guess it's graduate programs. Besides the Center for Transitional Justice, which I do believe offers a degree in this, I'm not familiar. Oftentimes it's wrapped into international relations type or international affairs type programs. Like it could be a minor or a focus of those kinds of degrees. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good luck, Evelyn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tarek, for this conversation and for being with us here. Sorry for the noises around me. I'm very grateful for this conversation, and I think it is also maybe a step forward in Satyam to bring more of this conversation within the community and to start touching on it and sitting with it and learning, even from South Africa, to the things that we disagree with, or maybe we see that they were not done with real justice or justice as we wish for it to be. Then what can we do to also work on this together and to also hold these spaces in this together? And I really hope soon your court order that is not allowing you to enter the land will allow you to enter the land, and that we will have you facilitating, coming to also teach, coming to also hold with us in Satyam. That would be hopefully the next step with you, Tarek.
Inshallah.
Yeah, thank you, Tarek. Really appreciating everything that you shared and how much you're dedicated to this work. We're a bit over time right now, so we're just gonna do a little closing now.
Yeah.
Yeah, if there's Wolvi, did you want to share any announcements about anything?
Maybe we could invite to our next community call, global community call. That will be on August 10th. But otherwise, yeah, we would like, you can find all information about this on our website. I just posted the link, and we also have regular news and updates. We have broadcast channels on WhatsApp and Telegram if you want to follow up. And yeah, just if you could contribute to this to help finance like what we're doing here, because we want to offer this free of charge. Feel free to donate if you're able. Thank you.
Mm.
Thank you, Wolvi. And yeah, we do
Thank-
this series once a month. And if anyone wants to join, or if anyone has any contribution, or if you have any ideas, please feel free to bring your ideas. May,
Yeah.
do you want to say something?
I want to say thank you, Rivi, for holding and moderating the conversation. Ruvi, Susanna, Norit, everyone that helped prepare and is holding. Satyam, all of you, I'm very, very grateful. And again, Tariq, such an honor, Habibi, to have you. And I really hope we will also invite you again soon to such a conversation. I think this is just the beginning of this conversation and togetherness. And maybe we can bring something together to the community actually with you to continue in this, with this conversation. So thank you all. Such an honor.
If it's just one thing I want to request. Something is very strange with the connection here, and I think it's not just with me. There are other people also. I have not been able to connect normally to this conversation. I cannot raise my hand. I cannot do anything essentially.
I'm sorry, dear.
And so I think if you can just check out to see, and also when I tried getting in with using my Zoom app, using the ID number and the password, it didn't work.
There might be problems with like we all need to update Zoom. There seems to have been like a recent update that inhibited people from participating properly. We will, like, next time we will send around some help for signing up or preparing better. Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll check on our end if something was off.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for letting us know. And thank you, Tarek. Is there any last words before we wrap up? Any last thoughts that you wanted to share?
I'm feeling very grateful for all of you being here and willing to listen and stay on for so long. And I mean, as you can tell, I have both a lot of let's say a lot of heaviness around what is happening these days and how that is impacting so many lives and continues to do so, and how much work there is ahead of us, which isn't really even fully comprehended by those with power. And at the same time, I have this unquenchable sense of hope that if we can start to see each other in the human elements, that process, however long it will be a beautiful one. And if there's any place that has taught me that, I think that has been Ikomi and Satyam as a community, and that has been one of the most meaningful things that I've been a part of. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, dear. Thank you. And hope to see you next time as well. And we hope that you take our message to your friends and community, spread it around, invite others to join. Also, if you know people in the land who would like to meet with the community and be present in the land and join what is happening in the land, please also help spread this message, this invitation to Israelis, Palestinians, internationals who would like to also take part in what is happening in the land. And yeah, we hope to see you soon. And thank you for your time. And again, really, Dipti, thank you for holding Tarek. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful night or day
Yes.
or something in between.
Yes. Bye bye, dears.
Good night.
Good night.